We're going to switch back. Yep, so it's live. Okay. I'm going to switch back to here. And then when you want to switch to Nina, I'll sit there, but you can help me come up if something happens. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Right.
Oh, we have Che back too.
Cool. And then.
Hey, Che, can you hear us?
I can. Hi.
Hey, hi. Okay, so there's a bit of a lag because we don't have the best internet reception, but we're going to do the best we can. All right, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the panel, and then Chris, who is here, is going to go first, and then Nina, and then Che.
Okay.
Stand up here, and you'll be on the camera. So it's up to you if you want to do that.
Okay. All right. Thank you all for your patience this morning. Thank you, Katie, for tech help, and Mike. Yay, I appreciate you all. So my name is Magali. I'm a board member outreach. We are a national social justice network of current and former sex workers and allies who are dedicated to the basic health and human rights of people in the sex. We're a chapter-based organization in plus chapters throughout the United States who engage in a variety of different activities, whether that be direct service, advocacy, etc. And today I'm excited to be talking about LEAD with sex work. LEAD is a criminal justice intervention that is rooted in harm reduction and social service provision. And it's been talked about a lot during this conference. It is really being held up as a drug diversion program that is a good alternative to drug court, which is oftentimes punitive and prescriptive, as well as incarceration. And we heard from Robert Childs right before this that there's 6 currently operating LEAD programs across the nation, and 3 of those include sex work currently. However, sometimes sex work has to do with drug use, and so and so there hasn't been quite the intentionality around sex work that there has with drug use, the funding with sex work as there is with drug use, and so there has been some pushback from the sex worker community as to whether LEAD is the best incremental intervention with sex work. And so we at SWOP have been hosting some conversations, and so this is the second part of conversations. If you'd like to hear the first part, it's on our webpage. And so without further ado, I am going to introduce our panelists. Chris Nyroff is here with us today, LEAD National Support Director at the Public Defender Association in Seattle, Washington. He has worked on LEAD program design and implementation and has been doing technical assistance for jurisdictions interested in implementing their own LEAD projects since 2012. Executive Director of Street Outreach Services from 1997 to 2008. He has worked as an outreach worker, evaluator, ethnographer, and community organizer, and has consulted throughout the U.S. and internationally. And then Nina, who is right here, switch to Nina. That's Nina. Hi, Nina. Nina Marsupian, who is joining us virtually today, is a queer Middle Eastern former sex worker and former drug user based in both Baltimore and Philadelphia. She is committed to advocating and practicing harm reduction with an intersectional approach that centers the voices of those with personal experiences. Nina is currently completing her degree in gender and women's studies with a focus on critical race theory at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. During her time in Baltimore, she co-founded a local branch of the Sex Workers Outreach Project and is currently working on expanding street outreach to sex workers in Baltimore City. Nina is also heavily involved with Project SAFE and the Philadelphia Red Umbrella Alliance and existing harm reduction efforts, and advocate for LEAD in Philadelphia. And then Che Johnson Long, Che, thanks for joining us, is a queer Black femme community organizer and trained herbalist who hails from Los Angeles. She is currently co-coordinating the plan of Atlanta, Fulton County's pre-booking diversion initiative through the Racial Justice Action Center. Thank you all for joining us, and with that, I am going to turn it over to Chris.
Great, thanks. Can you guys in the back hear me? Great. I have to apologize. My voice is like completely trashed. And so I'm hoping I will be able to make it through this without a complete loss of, but we'll see. So I know that many of you have actually heard like the origin story of LEAD in Seattle before, so I'm not going to go into that very much, but I am going to tell a part of it that I don't think I've ever really told before. So for those of you that have heard, and for those of you that haven't, the origin of LEAD in Seattle grew out of over a decade of incredibly contentious litigation centered around racial disparity in drug arrests in Seattle. And so we were in court all the time, that in a city where about 8% of the population was African American, about 60-some% of those being arrested for drugs were Black. And so this was the sort of the background that was going on. And then a part of the origin story that I know that some of you have heard before was that at the end of one round of litigation in 2005, the then captain of narcotics for the Seattle Police Department at a community meeting looked at all the people that were criticizing the police department, NAACP, ACLU, public defenders, and others, and said, well, you know, you guys say about the police department is true. What would you have us do differently? And we didn't have an answer for him except for a couple of rhetorical ones, one of which was end the war on drugs, and the other of which was start arresting white drug users, like 4 or 5 times as many as you're arresting now. What happened then was that those of us in the harm reduction direct service community actually started thinking about that in a really concrete way. And we started thinking about, let's say that instead of going to jail, someone was immediately offered services, and that it would be harm reduction based and it wouldn't require abstinence, and all that sort of stuff. That is what LEAD now looks like. And we sort of piloted it without police involvement in a neighborhood in Seattle that was predominantly people of color, and where there was lively street-based sex work and drug activity that was often quite overlapping. And we started this in 2006 and had been doing it for a while. And so the backstory here, this is part of the backstory, but is that at that point on my staff, the people that were actually implementing this pilot, 3 former sex workers, and a couple of whom were involved in SWOP time. And we realized that this intersection of drug use in the neighborhood that we were working in, that Venn diagram, that section of overlap was enormously high. And that in sex work out on the street there, we're engaging situationally, in the sense of like, oh shit, I need Pampers and I don't have any money. I'm out on the street and I'm going to do what I need to do in order to get Pampers, and then might not be back out on the street again until shit, the gas bill is due. And so we got really concerned about this happening that we were seeing with the people. And so we wanted to make the service delivery be available to all of the folks that were out there, even if their primary driver wasn't necessarily drugs, but it was overlapping with the drug market, and there was some involvement with it. So now, fast forward to when we actually get to talking about LEAD. So the end of this litigation is happening. The police department, the prosecutors, everybody is now on board with doing a diversion program. And those of us who were designing it were asking the police to include sex work as an eligible offense for diversion into LEAD based on our previous experience and years of doing street-based outreach. And we actually got pushback from the police at the time, who was like, you know, I can't ask the folks, drugs is one thing, but asking them to do a diversion for sex work is probably a little bit too much for them to do all at the same time. They can understand the drug part, but they might not understand that. I found quite confusing and confounding, and didn't really get. We were operating in a space where we needed for the police department to be totally comfortable and totally bought into the diversion criteria that they were going to be using. So we did a focus group with police officers about a month or so before doing lead, and there was a tremendous amount of skepticism among the police officers about doing it, but they started to get it, and they started to have some acceptance of it. And then we met with a couple of the officers, and you know, if you want any women in this program, you're going to have to include sex work, because the women that we're arresting here, we know they're doing it to support a drug habit, but we're not arresting them for drugs. We're arresting them for sex work and then finding drugs on them. And so that's how sex work ended up becoming part of the diversion criteria in Seattle. So one of the things to remember when people are talking about Seattle or looking at it is, we were the first its kind in the country. We had no model to go on. So to be utterly honest with you, we made shit up as we went along. We were building this airplane while it was already at 30,000 feet. And I mean, just to give you an example of that, we are on like our 14th or 15th version of our diversion protocol since we started. And, you know, we have adapted and changed stuff as we have gone along, because of the fact that we really did just sort of invent things and then, you know, realize, well, that's really not working the way we wanted, or, you know, had unintended consequences. So that's how sex work became a part of LEAD in Seattle. It was sort of this organic outgrowth of the real lived experiences of people who had been doing years of street outreach, and then involvement of the police officers themselves about talking about who they were arresting for and putting into LEAD. Okay, so having said that, sex workers in Seattle, LEAD looks the same as it does for diversion, for drug-based diversion. So, in other words, if someone is arrested for either drugs or for street-based sex work, then they are offered a diversion into LEAD. And if they accept that diversion and they complete an intake within 30 days, that arrest charge goes away. It does not exist. And that's all they have to do. They have to complete the intake, and that's it. There is no other requirement to the program. There is no requirement of abstinence for people. Reason for being in LEAD is drug use. There's no requirement for cessation of sex work if that's the route that they came in. So that we really don't see any referrals for street-based sex work in Seattle. So in 2015, we had one diversion that was for an arrest-based sex work charge. About 49% of our diversions now come in purely through a social contact route, which is where an officer in the course of his or her normal work, encountering someone out on the street, just says, hey, there's this program that has a variety of services. Would you be interested in it? But one thing that we do see is that in doing interviews, and we have a couple of LEAD case managers to back me up on this, that the overwhelming majority of women that have been diverted into LEAD report doing sex work, at least situationally, in support of their drug habits or of their other lifestyle issues that, you know, Pampers again. That's not their main motivation for coming into LEAD. So having said that, I think I'll close it and let Nina and Shay talk for a little bit. LEAD was not, in Seattle, was absolutely not designed as a sex worker diversion program. It was designed as a program for drug users who were coming into contact with the law. If we had had our way in Seattle, shoplifting, car prowls, mail theft, identity theft been included as LEAD eligible offenses, because we knew that all of those folks were coming into contact in support of their drug activity. we were not able to get the comfort level of the police to accept those for arrest-based diversions. But that has the beauty of the social contact-based diversion. So if an officer comes into contact with someone who's doing something not shoplifted several $100s worth of perfume from Macy's, they are not eligible for an arrest diversion or can give them a social contact route of diversion. So this is something that we're increasingly talking with folks in other jurisdictions, is don't necessarily think that an arrest-based diversion is what you have to model lead on, that you can do it in other ways. And in fact, there are a couple of jurisdictions in the United States that are looking at doing lead completely on a social contact-based model, and it would be for any behavioral health condition that they're encountering. So opening it up to a wide range of mental health conditions as well. So I think I'll leave it at that, if that's okay.
All right, so Nina, you're involved with the planning of Lead Philadelphia, and had spoken about the need for a program like this for people in the sex trade. And so you are up next. I'm hoping you can talk to all those things.
Okay, yeah, can you all hear me? Okay, so I'm in Philadelphia and I work with Project SAFE, and our organization is a harm reduction organization serving women in street-based economies. Because of this, we see a huge intersection between sex work and substance use. In Philadelphia, there are about 16 diversion programs, but they're all pre-trial or later. So the kind of need for a pre-booking diversion program is what kind of has brought LEAD into the conversation in Philadelphia. Although right now at the planning stage, it is not officially any type of LEAD model. We're very in the beginning stages of this. So the city has gotten a grant to create a pre-booking diversion program. And we have heard about this through other organizations. I went to a LEAD summit where I got to see Chris speak, and that's how our organization heard about LEAD, as well as several others. So we've been working together to kind of promote this as the model we want to build upon. I don't know if it will ever get to a pure LEAD program, but sex work seems to kind of have been casually thrown in to whatever the city is going to do. And we were kind of invited as an organization to come and flesh out what that means. So currently our organization is the only one that's really doing this focused thing. We work with several other community organizations to provide services like Prevention Point, Angels in Motion. We have several different things going on. So we're hoping that whatever comes out of this will build on and expand these networks, and hoping that we can just really get harm reduction bigger in the city. We were initially invited in the beginning of these conversations, which I think is really great. But after the initial LEAD summit and a meeting with community stakeholders, we were kind of starting to get left out of the loop. So we've really taken it upon ourselves to pursue this in a way that was not really planned prior. We had a listening session at one of the major HIV organizations, which is now, I guess, just all infectious diseases, called Action Wellness, where we met with a lot of community stakeholders and really talked about what diversion models we have in this city, kind of their strengths and weaknesses, including that the majority of them are for first-time offenders or limited contact with the criminal justice system, and that we really want to push for something that allows people that have been in and out of the system for decades. Trying to see. So we have an upcoming meeting with some city council members and the DA office, including those involved in the creation and implementation of current diversion programs and the future pre-booking diversion programs. And they actually seem to be pretty excited about working together and open to options. I know there has been a lot of talk in our city that it is currently for first-time offenders only, whatever this new model is, but they said that that is not something that they are stuck on. So we're hoping that that conversation kind of leads more towards that model. And a huge part of that is this thing about police officer accountability. We currently have a lot of issues, not just like through sex workers and their interactions with law enforcement, but also harm reduction in general. We've had several of our members who can legally carry clean and dirty needles through the syringe exchange in the city, complaining that cops will confiscate or throw away the needles that they're using as distributing, and just having a lot of issues with that. And we're hoping that through this model that we can kind of start to work together. Recently in Philadelphia, there was a string of murders and assaults towards specifically sex workers in the Philadelphia area, and that did open up a line of communication between SVU and our workers, in which they were actually able to start reporting assaults in their community, which was something they were very excited about, but has started to taper off now that he's been caught. And we're hoping that some sort of diversion program will open up a door that we can start having better communication, working together as a community. And LEAD kind of seems like the model that we've seen, that we've liked. I think we'd like to build on it to kind of shift it more towards us having power in it and seeing how much we can do out of our own pre-existing networks. But overall, like, it's harm reduction, and we're very into the idea that there is no required program after the intake. That is a huge part for us. And we're hoping that, like, the normalizing of providing services over incarceration will help really gain support for movements around decriminalization of sex work, as well as legalizing drugs. The people that we've been talking to within the city that are creating these diversion programs, even the diversion programs that we don't agree with, all agree that, like, incarceration is not working for either of these issues, that harm reduction does work, it has its merits, and that we should be talking about these different ways to go about it. And we're hoping that this all sort of leads towards decriminalization, even if it's longer than a lot of people hope for. We've had several conversations within our community of street-based sex workers that like diversion programs, but currently, in the way they're set up right now, they aren't accessible to the majority of our clients, and we're hoping that a LEAD model would become more accessible and open up the door for them to be seen as, like, actual people with actual agency to take control over their own healthcare in a non-judgmental manner. And we're really excited to see where it's going. I know in a couple weeks is our meeting with the DA, so we're pretty hopeful about it. We've also been working towards seeing if there's any other ways in which we can create our own diversion program more specific to sex work, but that's also very ways off. But yeah, no, we're excited about it. And the majority of people involved in our organization that are in the planning parts of this are current and former sex workers or current and former drug users, or both. And we're also very excited about that. So I think that's it on our end, but yeah, thank you for having us.
Thanks so much, Nina. All right, Shay, you are working in Atlanta to start to plan for, you all have been planning for, and you're looking to implement a pre-booking diversion program that centers the experience of people in the sex trade and people of color and people of trans experience. So it would be awesome to hear about that, the need for that, the planning process, and anything else.
Thank you, Magali, and thank you, Nina and Chris. Hear me all right? Excellent. Excellent. So I want to back up and just give a little bit of context for the Pre-Arrest Diversion Initiative. PAD is what we call it for short. So we really got started in 2014. In 2014, there was a banishment ordinance that was placed on sex work in Midtown Atlanta. And really that ordinance came out of sort of a joint effort between residents of Midtown through the Midtown Neighborhood Association, as well as the zone commander through Atlanta Police Department. And residents in the area were upset because they were really seeing sex work happening outside of their homes, and they wanted it to go away. And so the ordinance came down through APD and was backed up through the city. And it basically just said, this is a sex work free zone, which maybe sounds like a good idea, but what it actually ended up looking like was banishment. And because a lot of the sex work that we see in Midtown Atlanta is happening because it's survival sex work. And of course, as Chris talked about earlier, is also related to drug use, is also related to extreme poverty. Folks were essentially asking to just take it somewhere else, right? Take it to some other part of the city, which wasn't an actual answer to the problem. And so in 2014, a coalition was formed called the Solutions Not Punishment Coalition. And that coalition was really what began a citywide conversation about how to get to some of the root causes of offenses that are related to extreme poverty. And that's really the frame that pre-arrest diversion in Atlanta has taken on, is how do we get to the root of some of these offenses that are directly related to extreme poverty. And so then fast forward, we sent folks to Seattle, we met Chris, we were able to see firsthand how LEAD was happening in Seattle. And so in 2015, we started working with the City Council of Atlanta as well as Fulton County to pass 2 resolutions to get a design team. And the design team is basically a group of stakeholders. Right now, our design team is about, I want to say 65 people who represent the DA's office, the mayor's office, APD, various service providers, the city attorney, various judges, including magistrate judge and state court, as well as a number of the existing pre-trial programs. And as Nina was saying earlier, there are a number of pre-trial programs that exist in Atlanta, but similar to Philly, you have to be in the system already to access them. Often you have to be a first-time offender, and often they're not set up for people who have been experiencing addiction for a long time. They're not set up for incorporating any sort of harm reduction philosophy, and generally they're abstinence only. And so when we passed this resolution, both in the City Council as well as in Fulton County, we suddenly had an incredibly large amount of people that we needed to work with to develop the initiative. And so at this point, we're about halfway through the initiative, through the planning process. We decided on the location of the pilot and actually just had a really great meeting on our eligibility criteria. So thank you, Chris, for giving that context that you all are going through your 15th version. It feels like we're in our 15th version right now, and it's only the first one. So in terms of how sex work really falls into pre-arrest diversion, because it's a part of the origin story, and because that's the issue when we talk to Midtown residents, that is always the issue that comes up first. When we talk about quality of life policing, when we talk about just general safety issues, that's what comes up. The flip of that is that the Solutions Not Punishment Coalition that got formed from that Banishment Ordinance is an organization that's led by trans women, specifically trans women of color, who tend to often be the folks who are doing sex work in Midtown. So when we started doing outreach back in the area, one of our members tells this story. She's an incredible Black trans elder and community leader who actually used to do sex work in Midtown. And so she tells a story about how we launched in 2015 with our planning process, and we did outreach with an officer who was really looking to talk to some of the sex workers, talk to some of the women, and ask what kinds of services they need. And so this member is going out with an APD officer to the stroll that she used to work on, and is talking to women while they're working about what sorts of services they would want to see pre-arrest diversion include for participants. And she talks about just the incredible experience of hearing women talk about good experiences at different shelters in Atlanta, bad experiences, really name the mental health providers that have been helpful, name in front of this officer the specific officers who use excessive force when they're arresting people. And she talks about coming back to the planning meeting that we had the next week and really bringing this information to a room full of people who, quite frankly, didn't know a whole lot about sex work. And, you know, again, we're talking the DA's office, we're talking the mayor's office. And so she was really able to paint a picture of not just who our potential participants would be, but what folks would need straight from their mouths. Another story that I think is just, again, really a testament to how much work has been put in, and really, I think the goal of pre-arrest diversion inside of reducing recidivism is changing hearts and minds so that we're able to expand, right? So that we're able to actually get people on board with harm reduction. And that story is that the zone commander, who was part of initiating the Banishment Ordinance, later became the same zone commander that we are now working with through pre-arrest diversion. And so we had a sit down with him, I want to say maybe 6 months ago, to tell him that we were considering launching our pilot in his area. And, you know, it was a bit of a tense meeting, because this is an officer who very much believed that kicking people out of Midtown was the way, right? And so we were coming to say there was actually a new way. There's a new way to deal with sex work. There's a new way to get people services, and to ideally see some of the folks who are on the street find other options. And also to make sure that we were not promising more than we could actually deliver. So we had this conversation with him. And within 3 months, we get a phone call from a resident who says, listen, they're not arresting people anymore. There's no arrests for sex work happening in Midtown. And so we called around and found out that that same zone commander had basically launched his own pre-arrest diversion in Midtown and had decided that arresting people for sex work wasn't working. And so he stopped. He stopped arresting people. He told all of his officers to leave folks alone for an indefinite amount of time. And he sent officers out from our community affairs and LGBT liaison offices to start doing outreach with folks and to really start talking about what sorts of services would people on the street need in order to not have to be on the street. And I can't stress to you how floored I was to get that call. And to recognize that so much of the work of pre-arrest diversion is really talking about why people have offenses that are related to extreme poverty, and really what needs to happen in the city around service provision in order for some of these offenses to be dealt with differently. And certainly with the end goal being that we want to reduce recidivism. Right now, the city has an 80% recidivism rate, and that's 40% above the national average. And so when we tell people that number, they say, you know, who are the folks that you would focus on if you were trying to cut that 80% down to 60? And we give this list, you know, we say people who are affected by addiction, people with unmet mental health needs, and people who are in extreme poverty. But honestly, those are all the same people, you know, those aren't separate groups. And often we find that the people that we are working with who are involved in sex work also have used drugs, also have unmet mental health needs, also are experiencing extreme poverty. And it's actually very important to us that we don't compartmentalize those issues or those needs. I think similar to what Chris was saying about how folks come in through Seattle Lead initially with another issue, that sex work isn't the reason why they enter. From surveying and without having launched yet, but certainly through talking to people and doing a number of focus groups, we found that a lot of the women who are doing sex work in Midtown are interested in joining pre-arrest diversion, but similarly, the issues that they want to address inside of their service plans are not really about sex work. They're about unmet mental health needs. They're about securing a home, they're about job placement or job training. And so we're really figuring out how do we create a service plan that's really robust and that also doesn't do what a lot of the other programs do in the city, which is shame people or require people to stop doing sex work in order to access their services. The last thing that I'll say about Atlanta, which I think is really important to note, is that our design team is very much representative of stakeholders and potential participants. And so the woman that I referenced earlier who was doing outreach in the same area that she used to do sex work is on the design team, as well as a number of other folks who either currently are or have been a part of sex work. And so as we're talking about things like eligibility criteria, it's very important to have them in the same room with APD. It's really important to actually walk through not just APD's perspective of how an arrest might go and how a referral might go and figure out a bit of a theoretical protocol, but also to hear from people who actually have experienced those arrests, who actually have gotten those charges. What does it actually look like? And sometimes those stories are vastly different, which is understandable. And so I think if I were to offer just lessons learned, I think one of the biggest ones for us is really to make sure that we get the people who are most affected by the issue in the room, and to not shy away from having that representation in a really diverse group of people, both politically and demographically. And what that's resulted in is us being able to fine-tune our eligibility criteria to include charges like pedestrian in a walkway, which might sound bizarre, but is actually the charge that most sex workers get when they're arrested, which is then followed by some sort of drug-related offense. And so it's little pieces of knowledge like that that we've been able to really garner from being able to have folks in the room and really listen to people who are most directly affected. I'll stop there because I could go on for a very long time.
Great, thank you so much, Jay. We have time for a couple of questions. So if you could please say who you are directing your question to, I can queue them up on the virtual software. So, questions.
Ed Manchester from New York City, Home Health. Been having conversations with officials about diversion center in the South Bronx. And it's mostly a pre-arrest diversion center that, you know, what we've been talking to the officials about. And listening here, and knowing the needs of the South Bronx, you know, pre-arrest is just not enough for us. Can you see, and this is just for the panel, pre-arrest and post-arrest diversion center, saying, organization, place,
Yeah, I can handle that. I mean, in reality, when you're talking about social contact, that is getting to that point of view. So the LEAD, as it was originally designed, was a post-arrest pre-booking diversion program. Contact route allowed the officer to make it even pre-arrest. And I would strongly advocate for if you can't get a pre-arrest alone, trying to get it incorporated in, because that way you can end up with all folks that law enforcement come into contact with. And I will say that I think one of the things, just want to follow up on something that Che said in her talk there, which is standing down on the drug war. And this is one of the things that we have seen happen with leads. So some of our original lead officers had not, they were done with doing drug arrests. They wanted something else to do. So they were definitely into a pre-arrest type of diversion program. Some of their other officers were not yet there. And so they needed a formal program like this. One of the things that we have seen in Seattle is that basically drug arrests don't exist anymore. We've gone from 2,800 felony drug arrests in the area where we piloted LEAD, the year we piloted it, to down to a few hundred. And so we don't know what's going on, but we know that it has gotten the Seattle Police Department out of the drug war.
Hi, thank you all very much. My name is Mark Hansky. I work with Open Society Foundations. My question, this is something that I think we've heard a lot of debates on this. I'm curious, how do you balance the objective, particularly from law enforcement and recidivism, with participants who might want diversion from arrest, access to services, but not to stop engaging in sex work? And I'm thinking particularly outside of the US, where it's seen as diversion from sex work and not from arrest. And people are like, I don't want to be trained to, sew clothes all day. I'd rather, sex worker.
Did either of you want to say something? Nina? Okay, sorry, Nina.
Yeah, I think that that's kind of towards what the end of what I was saying about moving towards decriminalization through this, because a lot of our participants do not want to stop doing sex work. They just want to do sex work safer. But at the same time, a lot of them don't currently want to stop using substances either. I think a lot of that is like, how do we provide services that aren't pushing abstinence? And that's a big part of this, is like doing this in a non-judgmental way, because some of these people have been, we have a participant who's been using heroin for 25 years. This is not a thing that is likely going to stop. And we're just trying to provide services in a way that she can do this as safely as possible. So it's really not to kind of end anything as much as make this safer. We're not here as a part of the war on drugs or the war on sex work. We're just trying to get people to do it safely. And we see this as an interim step towards decriminalization and legalization of drugs. Yeah.
Thank you all for the presentations. I'm Peter Schick from New York. This is really interesting what Jessica said and what Chris said about, as I understood the description of the social work girls earlier about the legal model in Seattle, is that these are situations where a police officer knows someone who's maybe been arrested previously and so on, and then comes across them, but the person is not in the process of committing an offense, an arrestable offense, and that's where the social work role happens. But it sounds like maybe it's beyond that officers are using their discretion. They're coming across, it sounds like sometimes officers are coming across people who are committing an arrestable offense, but they choose not to arrest them. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
That really gets to about, and Jay was talking about, is really de facto decriminalization. Not officially, but using law enforcement's powers of discretion to basically decriminalize.
That seems to be what is happening. We don't know this because we haven't actually been able to interview officers about what the hell's going on in their head with their decision-making process about this. But the reality, what we're seeing seems to indicate they're done with this, and they're choosing to do arrest-based diversion in the course of their work, and they're just, I can tell you, I shouldn't probably say this. I'm not going to say it because I don't want to jeopardize anyone's job. We know for sure that there are police officers who are doing this when they are seeing stuff that they are mandatorily required to arrest someone for. They're doing this, they're walking around the block, and then they're coming back. Activity is over.
So I'd love to take everyone else's questions, but it's 12:30. And so if you have questions, please ask Chris. And then maybe potentially I'll ask these two offline if I can give their contact information as well. And again, we have been trying to host several of these conversations, so we are hoping that we can continue to talk about this. Thank you so much. Thank you.
You guys, I'm gonna end it.
Have a wonderful Saturday.